The first field. It starts with mud, cold, wet, and thick around the ankles of a young man named Fritz Pollard, standing on a football field that didn't really want him there. The year is 1915, and football is a white man's game. The crowd in the wooden stands shouts for blood, not for sport, for him. Pollard was small, barely 5'9", but fast and stubborn. He'd grown up in Chicago, one of 7 children in a time when a black family could hardly find a place to rent, let alone a fair chance. But on the field at Brown University, Fritz wasn't supposed to exist. Coaches told him he was too dark. Players told him to go back where you belong. When he lined up in the backfield, white defenders whispered slurs through their mouth guards. Then the ball was snapped. Pollard cut left, then right, then straight through a wall of bigger white players. He ran until he couldn't hear them anymore. That day, he scored 3 touchdowns. The fans booed louder. Fritz Pollard became the first black player to lead his team to the Rose Bowl. When the whistle blew, he walked off the field to silence. No cheers, no congratulations. His own coach refused to shake his hand. But Fritz didn't need applause. He only needed another carry, and that carry would take him somewhere no black man had gone before. Part 2, the first coach. By 1920, the new American Professional Football Association, what would become the NFL, was forming. White owners met in smoke-filled rooms to divide the teams, the schedules, and the profits. They didn't plan on including any black players. But then someone mentioned Pollard. He had been destroying semi-pro teams around Chicago, running faster and thinking sharper than anyone else. Reluctantly, they let him in, first as a player, then, unbelievably, as a coach for the Akron Pros. Every week, he had to fight for the right to stand on his own sideline. Some stadiums refused to let him enter through the front gate. Opposing coaches demanded he not touch the ball. White players spat at him in the huddle. Still, Pollard led the pros to the first ever league championship. His players respected him, but the rest of the league didn't. Reporters called him boy. Fans yelled from the stands, "Get that N-word off the field." Pollard refused to bend. He wore his suit and tie on the sideline, like armor. He shook every hand after every game, even the ones that refused to reach back. He believed that if he kept winning, the hate would stop. It didn't. When the league reorganized and grew more popular, the white owners decided there was no room for controversy. By 1926, Fritz Pollard and every other black player were pushed out. No letter, no reason, just gone. But Fritz wasn't finished fighting yet. Act 1, Part 3. The Black Five and the Quiet Band. After being forced out, Pollard built his own team, the Brown Bombers, an all-black squad that played anywhere that would take them. They traveled in broken buses, slept in church basements, and used borrowed equipment. Crowds came to laugh at them. They left silent. White teams refused to schedule them, claiming it wasn't safe. The newspapers stopped printing their scores. The NFL pretended they didn't exist. For nearly 20 years, no black player took an NFL snap. It wasn't an official rule, but every owner knew the code. Keep the league white. Pollard spent those years coaching, teaching, and writing letters begging for fairness. None were answered. He died in 1986, old but unbroken, still wearing his Brown Bombers cap. The league finally called him a pioneer, decades too late. He had been the first black quarterback, the first black coach, the first to win a championship, and the first to be erased. Fritz Pollard's story isn't only about what he did. It's about what was done to him and how he refused to let it define him. But as the years rolled on and black players slowly returned to the field, they would find that the color of their skin still dictated the rules. Act 2, Part 1. The doors close. By the early 1930s, the world looked different, but the rules hadn't really changed. The Great Depression was crushing the country, and people looked for someone to blame. In football, that blame turned toward the few black players still holding roster spots. Owners met in hotel ballrooms filled with cigar smoke and quiet racism. No rule was ever written down, but every white owner knew the code. They said things like, "It's better for business this way." In 1933, no black players were signed, not one. The newspapers didn't mention it. Fans didn't notice. But the men who had fought to earn their place felt the door slam behind them. There were no headlines, just silence. Joe Lillard, one of the last black players before the cutoff, played for the Chicago Cardinals. He was fast, talented, and could play nearly every position. but referees gave him extra penalties for nothing, and defenders took cheap shots after the whistle. When he complained, his own coaches called him a problem. By the end of the season, he was gone too. The league was now completely white again, and the ban was hidden behind words like character and team chemistry. Every black player knew exactly what those words meant. But outside the NFL, something was starting to grow, a fire that refused to die out. Act 2, Part 2, The Forgotten Years. For 13 years, no black man played in the National Football League. The newspapers called it the Gentleman's Agreement. Gentlemen, meaning the white men who ran the teams. They didn't want to share locker rooms, hotels, or paychecks with black athletes. So the best players looked elsewhere. Some went north to the Canadian Football League. Others joined barnstorming black teams that traveled from town to town, taking on anyone who would play them. They rode buses with broken windows and slept in segregated motels, but they kept playing. One of those players was Kenny Washington, a star at UCLA. He was powerful and precise, maybe the best. College halfback in the country. He played alongside Jackie Robinson, and both men faced the same cold truth. No NFL team would sign them. Scouts praised Kenny's skills, but ended every conversation the same way. He's good, but you know how it is. Washington graduated and joined the Los Angeles Police Department just to survive. He played on local semi-pro teams for pocket money and crowds of a few hundred. Everyone in those bleachers knew he belonged in the NFL. The owners didn't care. While white stars made headlines and endorsements, the league acted like Kenny, and men like him didn't exist. For more than a decade, black excellence lived underground, out of sight but never gone. Then, one city's team made a move that would accidentally reopen the door. Act 2, Part 3. The door opens again. In 1946, the Los Angeles Rams planned to move into the brand new Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. The stadium was publicly funded, paid for with taxpayer money. That meant the team had to allow everyone, black and white, to attend, and civil rights groups demanded the same be true for the players. City leaders told the Rams, "If you want to play in our stadium, you can't keep the league segregated." The owners hesitated, but the pressure was too strong. They needed a face to make the change look good, so they called Kenny Washington. When Washington signed with the Rams, he became the first black player to re-enter the NFL after the 13-year color ban. Soon after, the team also added Woody Strode, another UCLA standout. Both men were cheered by black fans and quietly hated by some of their white teammates. They had separate locker areas. They weren't allowed to stay in the same hotels as the team on the road. At practice, white players sometimes refused to block for them, but on game day, they still lined up, still ran the plays, and still stood tall under the weight of history. The color line had been broken, but not erased. It would take another generation of players and another wave of courage to change the league for good. Because even as Washington and Strode stepped onto that field, the system that kept them out for years was already finding new ways to hold the next men down. Act 2, Part 1. The meeting. No one talked about. It was a quiet winter morning in 1933 when 12 white men sat around a wooden table in a smoke-filled hotel room in Chicago. They were the owners of the National Football League. Their job that day was simple: plan the next season. But what really happened in that room would shape the league for more than a decade. No newspaper ever printed the words they used. No minutes were ever written down. But everyone who left that room understood the same rule. No more black players. They didn't call it a ban. They called it keeping things comfortable. One owner said white fans in the South wouldn't buy tickets if black men played. Another said sharing locker rooms might cause trouble. Not one of them spoke up to disagree. Outside those walls, a handful of black players still fought for spots. Men like Joe Lillard in Chicago, who ran harder than anyone and kicked field goals with a leg like a hammer. Fans loved watching him, but referees flagged him for made-up fouls, and white teammates refused to block for him. When a white player punched him after a whistle, the ref blamed Joe. The next week, his name disappeared from the roster. By summer, the league looked exactly how the owners wanted: all white. No headlines, no announcement. Just silence, cold and heavy, stretching across every stadium. But outside the NFL, the game didn't stop. Black athletes kept playing wherever they could. Sandlots, factory teams, barnstorming clubs that traveled from city to city in broken buses. They played for a few dollars, sometimes just for food, but they played anyway. People who came to watch them knew the truth. These men were better than half the players getting paid in the NFL. They saw running backs break tackles, quarterbacks throw perfect spirals, receivers diving through dirt for touchdowns. Yet none of it mattered to the white men in suits. The newspapers called it good business. The players called it what it was. Each game felt like a small act of rebellion. Every time a black team lined up, they were saying, "We're still here." But even as they fought to be seen, the country was sinking deeper into the Great Depression. Jobs were disappearing, and racism was becoming law again in places it had only hidden before. When a reporter once asked a white owner if a black player could ever return to the league, he smiled and said, "Maybe someday, when the public's ready." That someday never came. The NFL kept growing. Bigger crowds, more money, and for 13 straight years, not a single black man touched an NFL football. The hidden ban worked exactly as planned, but whispers began to spread in barbershops, church basements, and locker rooms. What if we make our own league? What if we stop waiting for their permission? Those whispers would soon turn into movement, because while white owners locked the gates, one city, far out west, was about to force them open again. Act 2, Part 2, The 13 Lost Years. By 1935, the color line was drawn so cleanly, you could see it from the cheap seats. Every player in the league was white, every coach, every owner, every face in the photo. The few who remembered Fritz Pollard or Joe Lillard spoke about them quietly, as if saying their names too loud might cause trouble. For black athletes, football didn't end, it just went underground. Across the country, factory yards and park fields became battlegrounds. In Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Los Angeles, black teams with names like the Chicago Comets, Harlem Brown Bombers, and Philadelphia Panthers kept the game alive. They played against anyone brave enough to line up. Sometimes they won by 40. Sometimes they were chased out of town before halftime. They didn't have fancy uniforms or stadiums. They played on dirt, sometimes grass, sometimes gravel. Referees were almost always white, and the flags always seemed to fall the same way. But when the ball snapped, none of that mattered. The crowd, mostly black, mostly poor, shouted like it was Sunday in church. Still, the pain never left. One night in 1937, a Chicago newspaper reporter named Harold Jenkins sat in a diner talking with a former player. The player's name was Leon Red Campbell, fast, strong, and forgotten. He told Harold, "We run harder than anybody, hit harder than anybody, but we can't buy a chance. They don't want us, not because we can't play, but because we can." That quote never made the paper. The editor cut it, saying, "That's not what our readers want to see." The system didn't need a rule book to keep black men out. It had fear. White fans feared sharing seats. White coaches feared losing jobs. And white owners feared what would happen if a black player became the best in the league again. Meanwhile, something else was changing. By the early 1940s, young men were leaving to fight overseas. World War II pulled soldiers from every color, but when they came home, they didn't return to the same country. Black soldiers had worn the uniform, fought for freedom, and bled beside white men in Europe. When they came home and saw signs that said, "Whites only," again, something inside them snapped. In small towns and cities, black veterans started organizing. They wrote letters to newspapers, held meetings, and demanded jobs, including in sports. They said if they were good enough to fight for America, they were good enough to play football in it. White owners ignored them, but the pressure was building. And in one corner of the country, a city unlike any other was listening. Los Angeles had grown fast during the war. Black families moved there for work in shipyards and factories. They paid taxes, built homes, and filled the stands of the Los Angeles Coliseum. When the Rams, a team owned by white businessmen from Cleveland, wanted to move west, black leaders in the city saw an opportunity. They told the owners, "If you want our stadium, you play by our rules." The owners smiled politely, pretending not to understand, but soon they would. Because one man, the same Kenny Washington who had been ignored for years, was about to get a phone call that would change everything. And this time, the door wouldn't just creak open, it would be kicked wide. To Act 1, Part 1, Act 2, Part 3, The Return to the Field. The phone call came late in the afternoon. Kenny Washington had just finished a long shift with the Los Angeles Police Department when his friend, a local sports reporter, told him, "The Rams want to meet. They're talking about bringing you in." For a moment, he didn't believe it. It had been nearly 7 years since college, 7 years since the NFL quietly decided that men like him didn't belong. He had spent those years playing semi-pro ball for a few dollars a game, his knees aching, his dream shrinking smaller each season. But when he walked into the Rams office, the air felt different. Not friendly, just cautious. The white men in suits wanted credit for something they didn't want to do. Kenny had heard the rumors. The team wanted to move into the new Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, built with public money. Civil rights leaders in the city had made it clear no segregation would be allowed in a public building. If the Rams wanted that stadium, they needed to sign a black player. Kenny looked across the desk at the general manager, who smiled but didn't meet his eyes. "We think you'd be a great addition to the team," the man said, his voice careful, almost rehearsed. Kenny nodded. He knew what this really was. Not a welcome, but a transaction. Still, it was a door, and he was ready to walk through it. That spring, the Los Angeles Rams officially signed Kenny Washington, making him the first black player in the modern NFL. A few weeks later, they added his college teammate, Woody Strode, two black men standing in a league that had erased their kind for 13 years. Their first practice drew reporters and photographers. The papers called it historic. But behind the headlines, the old hate waited. When the Rams traveled for road games, hotels refused to let Washington and Strode stay inside. They slept in small motels on the edge of town, sometimes in the bus itself. White teammates didn't sit with them at meals. Coaches told them not to cause trouble. And when a white player spit on Strode during a drill, everyone pretended not to see. Kenny never fought back with words. He fought with plays. Every carry was a statement. Every yard, a message. Fans cheered when he ran, then went quiet when they remembered who he was. He felt it, that pause between admiration and prejudice. It sat heavy on his shoulders, like an extra pad he could never take off. Reporters asked him if he was proud to break the barrier. He told them, "I'm just trying to play football." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He wasn't just running for himself. He was running for every man who'd been told no. In the same year, across the country, the Cleveland Browns of the All-America Football Conference, a rival league, signed two more black players, Marion Motley and Bill Willis. Both had been turned away by the NFL. Both came to play for a white coach named Paul Brown, who didn't care what color they were, as long as they could win. Motley was a bruising fullback who ran like a freight train. Willis was a quiet defensive lineman with speed no one had seen before. When they took the field, white crowds booed them. Then, they started cheering when the points stacked up. Their success proved something the NFL had spent 13 years denying. Black men didn't just belong in the league, they could dominate it. But the fight wasn't over. Even as more players joined, the racism stayed. White teammates used slurs in the huddle. Referees ignored late hits. Fans threw bottles from the stands. Kenny Washington's body broke down after only 3 seasons. His knees gave out, his back ached, and the game moved on without him. When he retired, he didn't get a parade or a trophy. He went back to quiet work, helping kids in his neighborhood learn the game he loved. Still, his presence had changed everything. Without Kenny and Woody in Los Angeles, there might not have been a Marion Motley in Cleveland. Without them, the league might have stayed closed even longer. They didn't get justice, but they got remembered. By the late 1940s, the color ban was officially dead, though the bias lived on in every locker room and every front office. The white owners who once called the shots still sat in power, pretending they had always supported progress. They smiled for cameras, but none of them ever apologized. Kenny Washington died young, at just 52, after years of pain that the league never paid to heal. When the Rams finally honored him decades later, it was too late for him to hear the cheers. But his story didn't end in silence. It became the start of something new, a movement of players who refused to be invisible ever again. And soon, one of them would not only play the game, but change it forever, because the next generation of black athletes wouldn't settle for getting in the door. They were coming to take the field and keep it. Act 3, Part 1. The call that changed everything. It was spring 1946 when the phone rang inside a small apartment in Los Angeles. Kenny Washington wiped the sweat from his hands before picking it up. The voice on the other end was careful, almost cold. "This is the Los Angeles Rams," the man said. "We'd like you to come by." Kenny didn't answer right away. For years, he had dreamed of those words. But he also knew what they really meant. The Rams didn't suddenly believe in fairness. They wanted the brand new Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, a public stadium built with taxpayer money. Civil rights leaders in the city had told them flat out, "If you want our stadium, you sign a black player." So the owners, all white, looked down a list of names until they reached the one that couldn't be ignored: Kenny Washington, UCLA star, local hero, still loved in Los Angeles, the perfect face for a deal they didn't actually believe in. When Kenny arrived at the meeting, he wore his best suit. The room smelled of cigars and paper contracts. The general manager smiled without smiling. He said all the right things. Great athlete, community inspiration, but never once said equal. Kenny signed anyway. He had waited 13 years for this moment. That night, he sat with his old teammate Woody Strode and said quietly, "They don't really want us there." Woody nodded. "Then we'll make them watch." Neither man knew what was coming, only that it would not be kind. But the next morning, the newspapers called them trailblazers. And across the country, black families cut out the articles and pinned them to walls. For the first time since Fritz Pollard, 2 black men were back in the NFL. But being let in wasn't the same as being welcomed. Act 3, Part 2. The longest season training camp was held under the hot California sun. Reporters filled the stands looking for mistakes. Every drop pass, every missed tackle, every breath was judged harder. White teammates kept their distance. Some refused to shake hands. In the locker room, Kenny and Woody were given corners by the door, far from everyone else. At team dinners, they were told the tables were full. On road trips, they were barred from the hotels. While the team slept in comfort, the 2 men stayed in cheap motels miles away. The front office told them it was for their safety. Kenny knew better. During one game, a white defensive end whispered a slur before the snap and then dove at Kenny's knees long after the whistle. The referee looked away. When Kenny limped off, the coach said, "That's football, son." But it wasn't football. It was punishment for being there. Woody Strode, tall and broad-shouldered, took the same hate head-on. Fans screamed names from the stands, words meant to hurt, words children should never hear. He looked up once, and a white man in the front row spat at him. Woody didn't respond. He just lined up again and hit the next man twice as hard. Despite everything, the 2 of them kept playing. They blocked, they tackled, they ran, sometimes just to prove they could. Black newspapers followed every snap, printing stories the white press refused to cover. Every headline carried pride and pain. Washington holds his own. Strode stands tall. But the Rams never gave them a real chance to shine. Kenny was used sparingly, subbed out after short runs. Woody was moved to backup, then to the bench. When asked why, a white coach said, "They're just not ready for the pro game." The lie was simple, and everyone who looked like them had heard it before. As the season dragged on, their bodies began to ache from the hits no flag ever called. Yet even in defeat, they represented something larger. Every game they survived proved the old myth wrong, that black men couldn't think fast enough, couldn't lead, couldn't belong. By winter, the Rams finished the season with a losing record. But in living rooms across America, 2 names had already won: Kenny Washington and Woody Strode. The men who made the league face itself, and soon their courage would spark another team, one 2,000 miles away, to tear down the color line completely. Act 3, Part 3, The Ripples of Courage. In Cleveland, a new league called the All-America Football Conference was trying to compete with the NFL. Its coach, Paul Brown, didn't care about skin color. He cared about talent. When he saw film of Marion Motley and Bill Willis, 2 black standouts from Ohio, he signed them without hesitation. Motley was built like a truck, 230 pounds of fury. Willis was lean and fast, a blur on defense. When they took the field, the crowd fell quiet, waiting to see them fail. Instead, they dominated. Motley ran through entire defenses. Willis chased down quarterbacks twice his size. Every hit they delivered shook the lie that had kept black players out for so long. Back in Los Angeles, Kenny Washington watched from his living room. He was proud and tired. His knees were gone. The years of abuse had worn him down. He knew his time was ending, but seeing Motley and Willis gave him peace. The wall he and Woody had cracked was finally breaking. Still, hate didn't disappear. In one game, a white lineman told Willis, "You don't belong here." The next play, Willis hit him so hard the man stayed down for a minute. When reporters asked about it later, Willis only said, "I was just doing my job." By 1949, the Browns were champions. The NFL could no longer pretend. Teams across the league started quietly signing black players. They called it progress, but for Kenny and Woody, the price had already been paid. Kenny retired with scars no one saw. He never got a parade, never a bonus, never a coaching offer. Woody left the game too, turning to Hollywood when football doors closed again. He played gladiators and soldiers, roles that let him be strong on screen in ways he couldn't be on the field. Years later, when asked what kept him going, Woody said, "Every insult made me run faster. Every look made me hit harder." Then he smiled, and they still had to watch. Kenny Washington died in 1971, only 52 years old. At his funeral, players black and white filled the chapel, but no one from the Rams' ownership showed. Outside, a few kids from the neighborhood tossed a football in the street. One of them asked who he was. An old man replied, "He's the reason you get to play." The color line was gone, but the prejudice stayed. Black players could play, but not lead. They could run, but not coach. And when one finally did, a quarterback named Doug Williams, the entire country would watch to see if history would repeat itself, because every yard gained by Kenny Washington and Woody Strode wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new fight waiting on the 50-yard line. Act 4, Part 1, the position they said we couldn't play. By the early 1950s, the NFL looked different on paper. Black players were back. They ran the ball, caught passes, made tackles. But one position stayed locked, quarterback. To white owners, quarterback meant leader. To them, leadership meant white. Whenever a black college star threw too well, a coach would smile and say, "You'll make a fine halfback." They called it athleticism, but it really meant stay in your lane. At Grambling, a young man named Willie Thrower had a cannon for an arm. He studied defenses, called his own plays, and carried himself like a field general. When the Chicago Bears finally signed him in 1953, reporters called him the experiment. He got one half of one game. He threw 5 passes, completed 3, and was sent back to the bench. The next season, he was gone. No one said why. They didn't have to. Fans in the stands used words louder than any coach. "Put the real quarterback in," they yelled, meaning the white one. That year, sports writers began using a new phrase, thinking positions. Quarterback, center, middle linebacker. Positions. Black players were quietly kept out of. They said it was about decision-making. It was really about control. College programs followed the same pattern. Scouts told black quarterbacks they'd never get drafted if they stayed under center. So talented passers like Johnny Walton and Carl Douglas switched positions, some to receiver, some to defensive back, just to get a chance. Every switch felt like a small theft. A dream stolen before it could live. The few who refused to move were punished in other ways. No playing time, no scholarships, no calls from scouts. It wasn't an open rule anymore. It was a whisper, passed from coach to coach, owner to owner. Keep the quarterback white. But in the late 1960s, that whisper was about to meet someone who wouldn't listen. Act 4, Part 2, Marlin Briscoe and the Game That Changed the Room. Omaha, Nebraska, 1968. Marlin Briscoe was 5'10" and fearless. He had been a star quarterback at Nebraska-Omaha, setting records for passing and rushing. When the Denver Broncos drafted him, they told him the same lie everyone else heard. "We're moving you to cornerback." He agreed quietly, but never stopped practicing throws after dark. Every night, he and a few teammates stayed late on the field, running routes under the stadium lights that flickered like fireflies. He threw tight spirals until his arm ached. He waited for a chance. It came in week 3, when the Broncos' white starter was injured. The coach had no choice. "Briscoe, you're in," he said, like it hurt to say the words. Marlin jogged to the huddle. The crowd murmured. A black quarterback in the AFL. It had never happened before. The defense jeered. "You're in the wrong place, boy." Briscoe ignored them. On his first drive, he threw a dart for 22 yards. Next play, another completion, then a touchdown. By the end of the game, he had thrown for 335 yards and 4 scores. The Broncos won. Reporters who once mocked him now called him the magician. But the magic didn't last. The next season, a new white coach arrived and cut him before camp even started. No explanation. Marlin was traded, moved to receiver, and told to forget about quarterback. He finished his career catching passes instead of throwing them. Still, his brief run cracked something open. Black kids around the country finally saw someone who looked like them behind center. They cut out his picture and taped it to bedroom walls. They whispered, "If he can do it, so can we." But the white establishment saw something else. If more black quarterbacks succeeded, it would mean admitting the old lies were never true. And one owner in particular was determined not to let that happen. Act 4, Part 3, Shaq Harris and the Storm Before the Change. James Shaq Harris came out of Grambling State in 1969, coached by Eddie Robinson, one of the few men willing to develop black quarterbacks. Harris had a strong arm, calm eyes, and leadership that couldn't be taught. The Buffalo Bills drafted him, reluctantly. When he arrived at camp, the head coach told reporters, "He's here for competition." Inside the locker room, players laughed. One white lineman muttered, "Competition for what? Waterboy?" Harris started as third string. He studied the playbook while others ignored him, knowing he'd get no second chance. Then, an injury forced him in. He threw a touchdown on his first drive. Silence fell on the sideline. Over the next few seasons, he bounced between benches until the Los Angeles Rams signed him in 1973. By then, he was 26 and tired of waiting. When the starter went down, Harris took over and won. Week after week, he led the Rams to victories. He read defenses, called audibles, and kept his poise under pressure. By midseason, they were playoff favorites. Fans sent him letters. Some were thank yous, many were threats. Racist notes filled with the same hate that had followed Kenny Washington and Woody Strode decades earlier. During one home game, a white man in the crowd held up a sign that read, "Bench the boy." Harris saw it, but never looked away from the field. That night, he threw for 3 touchdowns. The Rams won their division, and Harris became the first black quarterback to start and win an NFL playoff game. Afterward, a reporter asked him how it felt to be a credit to your race. He answered softly, "I just wanted to be a credit to my team." The next season, despite success, he was benched for a white backup who hadn't thrown a pass all year. When teammates questioned it, the coach said, "We need someone with more command." The code words never changed. By the time Harris retired, he had proved what should have been obvious. Talent has no color, but proving it cost him years of abuse that no stat line could show. He later became one of the NFL's first black front office executives, helping young players who faced the same barriers he had. He told them, "They may not want you to lead, but you lead anyway." From Willie Thrower to Marlon Briscoe to Shaq Harris, every throw they made carried the weight of generations. Each time the ball left their hands, it flew through a century of doubt, and every catch pulled the league 1 inch closer to truth. But even as black quarterbacks started to appear, another wall waited ahead: coaching, ownership, and the media that shaped every story. The fight would move from the field to the sidelines, and the world would soon meet the first man to shatter the myth on the biggest stage of all. Because the next act isn't about being allowed to play. It's about finally being allowed to win. Act 5, Part 1, After the Door Cracked. The 1970s looked brighter from the stands, but inside locker rooms, the air was still heavy. Black players filled rosters now, yet leadership stayed white. Quarterback jobs, coordinator jobs, even simple captain patches, those were still reserved. When James "Shaq" Harris walked away from the game, he left behind proof that a black man could lead a team, but he also left behind the whispers. Scouts still said the same quiet line to black college stars: "Great athlete. Position, at Grambling State." Coach Eddie Robinson kept producing quarterbacks who could read defenses like books. He called them his field professors. One of them was a tall, calm passer named Doug Williams. Robinson told him, "You have to be twice as good to get half as far." Doug nodded. He had seen what happened to Briscoe and Harris. He knew what waited beyond college: empty promises and white coaches who'd call him son, but never starter. In 1978, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted him in the first round, the first black quarterback taken that high. Fans cheered at the pick, but the smile in the owner's box didn't reach his eyes. The head coach told reporters, "We're giving the kid a chance. See what he can do." Chance was the key word. Never trust. Tampa Bay had been a joke franchise, losing almost every week. When Williams arrived, the locker room was divided. Some white players refused to sit near him. One said out loud, "He ain't my leader." Doug said nothing. He just learned every play until he could recite them backward. Opening day, the stadium heat shimmered like fire. First drive, he threw a strike downfield. Touchdown. The crowd roared, but the next week, when the team lost, the newspapers called him erratic and immature. Every mistake was magnified. Every success was luck. The white backup threw an interception, and they called it a learning moment. Doug threw one, and it was proof of limits. Still, he kept winning. By his third season, Tampa Bay reached the NFC Championship. No one had ever expected it. Yet, even then, the owner refused to give him a fair contract. When white quarterbacks with worse records made double, Doug was told, "You should be grateful for what you've got." He walked out. No parade, no thank you. Just another door slammed shut. White fans burned his jersey outside the stadium. The radio called him ungrateful. He packed his bags and left the NFL altogether. But what looked like an ending would soon become the start of history. Act 5, Part 2, Exile and the Road Back. Williams found himself in the USFL, a new league trying to compete with the NFL. He signed with the Oklahoma Outlaws, then the Arizona Outlaws when the team moved. The crowds were smaller, the paychecks thinner, but he finally played free. No coded language, no silent hate in the huddle, just football. When the USFL collapsed, Doug thought about quitting. He moved back home to Louisiana, took a job coaching high school kids, and tried to stay invisible. But one man noticed him again, Joe Gibbs, head coach of the Washington Redskins. Gibbs had been an assistant in Tampa years before. He'd seen how Doug studied film until midnight, how he never quit. In 1986, Gibbs called him. "Come to DC," he said. "We need a quarterback who can lead." Doug was skeptical. Washington was one of the last teams to integrate. The name itself, Redskins, carried its own history of pain. But he accepted, because deep down, he knew what it meant if he succeeded. His first months back in the NFL were quiet. He was a backup again, sitting behind a white starter who struggled but never lost his spot. When fans recognized Doug on the street, some whispered, "Didn't you wash out?" He smiled and kept walking. Then, in 1987, the starter got injured. Gibbs turned to Williams. The locker room went silent. One white player muttered, "Guess we'll see." Doug looked at him and said, "Yeah, we will." The strike-shortened season was chaos. Replacement players, angry crowds. But Doug stayed steady. He led Washington into the playoffs, reading defenses like pages. Still, the reporters focused on everything but the play. They asked if a black quarterback could handle the pressure of the big moment. Doug said, "Pressure is when you have 4 kids and no job. This is just football." That quote ran in every paper. Fans began to see him differently, some with respect, others with resentment. He kept his focus on one goal, the Super Bowl. And on a warm January evening in San Diego, that moment finally arrived. Act 5, Part 3, the Super Bowl. Nobody believed Super Bowl 22, January 31st, 1988. Washington Redskins versus Denver Broncos. The stands shimmered under the lights. Millions watched from home. No black quarterback had ever started a Super Bowl. Before kickoff, a white reporter asked, "Doug, how long have you been a black quarterback?" Doug stared at him, half smiling. "All my life," he said. The room laughed nervously, but the message landed. Early in the game, it looked bad. Denver scored first, 10-0. Then, Doug's knee twisted awkwardly under a tackle. He limped off. The crowd gasped. Whispers started again. "He's done." Typical. On the bench, doctors told him to sit. He looked at Coach Gibbs and said, "Tape it up." He went back in. What happened next became legend. In one quarter, just 12 minutes, Doug Williams threw 4 touchdown passes. A record. Each throw was like breaking a chain. The white fans who had doubted him stood up and cheered. His teammates, once quiet, lifted him on their shoulders. When the clock hit 0, Washington had scored 42 points and won the Super Bowl. Doug Williams was the game's most valuable player. On the field, cameras crowded around him. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, calling it a great day for diversity. But they hadn't been there for the slurs, the pay cuts, the doors that closed. Doug just said, "This one's for everybody who was told they couldn't." In black neighborhoods across America, families cried watching the TV. Old men who remembered Fritz Pollard and Shaq Harris sat in silence. knowing the cost of that moment. Boys ran outside with footballs yelling, "I'm Doug Williams." For the first time, they could say it and believe it. After the parade, things didn't magically change. White coaches still filled sidelines. White owners still wrote the rules. But no one could ever again say, a black quarterback can't win the big one. Doug Williams had done it on the biggest stage of all. Years later, when he became a front office executive, young players came to him for advice. He'd tell them, "Don't let them write your story for you. Write it yourself." Closing of Act 5. From the quiet exile of Shaq Harris to the shining night in San Diego, every step had led here. A century of walls built by white hands and broken by black courage. The fight wasn't finished. It simply moved to new ground. Coaching staffs, ownership, and media voices. But for one night in 1988, the whole country saw what had always been true. Excellence needs no permission. Act 6, Part 1. The New Wall. When Doug Williams lifted that Super Bowl trophy in 1988, millions of black fans believed a door had finally opened. But behind the cameras, another door stayed shut. It was the one that led upstairs, to the head coaching offices and owner suites. The league was full of black talent. By the late 1980s, almost 70% of players were black, yet every head coach was white. Reporters didn't ask why. Owners didn't have to answer. They just said, "Coaching is about leadership and trust." Everyone knew what that meant. One man decided to stop waiting for permission. Art Shell, a former Raider who had spent years blocking for others, took a job on the sideline. He studied film late into the night, built playbooks, and waited. When the Raiders fired their coach in 1989, owner Al Davis shocked the league. He handed the headset to Shell, the first black head coach of the modern era. The headline sounded proud, but the tone underneath wasn't. White columnists called it a gamble. One even wrote, "Can a locker room handle a black man giving orders?" Players already knew the answer, yes. Shell led the team to the playoffs in his first season. Still, other owners refused to follow. At owners' meetings, photos show a sea of white faces in gray suits. They traded jokes, voted on rules, and avoided the subject. One executive whispered to a reporter, "We're not ready for that kind of experiment everywhere." The next year, when Shell lost a few games, the same reporters called for his firing. White coaches with worse records were called rebuilding. For Shell, it was overmatched. He stayed calm, saying only, "We just want the same rope to climb." But even as he stood on the sideline, black assistants across the league hit the same ceiling. And one of them, a soft-spoken coach from Pittsburgh, was about to break through it and pay for it. Act 6, Part 2. Dennis Green and the burden of being. Dennis Green grew up in Pennsylvania, the son of a steelworker who told him, "If the door's closed, knock louder." He played running back at Iowa, but his real gift was teaching. He became a college coach, then an NFL assistant under Bill Walsh. Players loved him. Steady voice, sharp mind. By 1992, the Minnesota Vikings took a chance and made him head coach. He was only the second black head coach in the league's history. When he walked into his first press conference, every camera flashed. A white reporter asked, "Do you think the players will respect you?" Green smiled politely. "They already do." He led the Vikings to 8 playoff appearances in 10 years, one of the best records in the league. But respect came slow. Each loss brought whispers. Can he handle pressure? Each win brought surprise. He's actually good. During one game in 1998, Minnesota started 15-1 behind rookie Randy Moss. It was electric. Yet before the NFC title game, a national magazine ran a headline, "Can Green keep control?" The photo showed him scowling, cropped darker than the others on the page. After the heartbreaking overtime loss, talk shows blamed his temperament. White coaches who yelled were passionate. Dennis Green was angry. That same season, black assistants around the league noticed something. When they applied for head coaching jobs, teams said, "We're going in another direction." That direction always seemed to point toward another white candidate. Tony Dungy, a quiet defensive coordinator in Tampa, kept hearing the same. Interview after interview ended with smiles and no offers. One owner even told him, "You're impressive, but I just don't see you as a head coach." Translation: too black to lead a white room. By the late 1990s, the numbers were clear. Only 2 black head coaches in 31 teams. Black players made most of the league, but the people giving orders still looked the same. The silence was starting to crack. civil rights groups, journalists, and even a few white allies began to ask, how can a league built on black talent have almost no black leadership? Owners called the question divisive, but the truth was about to come out on national television. Act 6, Part 3, The Rooney Rule and the Echoes After. In 2002, the league faced a problem it could no longer hide. Two respected black coaches, Tony Dungy and Dennis Green, were fired after winning seasons. At the same time, several white coaches with losing records kept their jobs. That summer, civil rights attorney Johnny Cochran held a press conference. He showed charts proving the imbalance and said, if you can run a route, you can get on the field. If you can run a team, you can't get in the office. The statement hit hard. Under pressure, owners met again, this time in the same kind of smoky room that had once banned black players. They needed a fix that looked like progress but didn't cost them control. They created the Rooney Rule, named after Steelers owner Dan Rooney. It required every team to interview at least one minority candidate for any head coach opening. When it was announced, the league congratulated itself. Reporters called it a step forward, but many black coaches quietly said what others wouldn't. You can interview us all day, you just don't hire us. In the early years, the rule helped a few. Tony Dungy finally became head coach in Indianapolis and won the Super Bowl in 2007. Lovie Smith did the same with Chicago the same night. Two black coaches facing each other for a title. For a moment, it felt like real change. Then, the old habits came back. Teams began conducting check-the-box interviews with no intent to hire. Assistant described flying across the country for a 30-minute meeting. They'd already picked their guy, he said. I was there for the photo. Owners stayed white. General managers stayed white. And when a black coach failed, his leash was half as long. Jim Caldwell won 36 games in 4 years with Detroit. A white replacement went 13-29 and kept his job. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the numbers still hadn't moved much. For every Dungy or Smith, there were 10 black assistants stuck waiting. They shared stories of being passed over, of being told to get more experience, while younger white coordinators jumped ahead. The press rarely mentioned race directly anymore. Instead, they used softer words, leadership style, energy. Everyone knew what those words really meant. Yet even through that, black coaches kept building resumes and refusing to disappear. They had seen what silence cost in the past. They started mentoring younger coaches, demanding transparency, forming groups to track hiring data. Each small action chipped at a wall older than the league itself. Today, the Rooney Rule still exists. It has been expanded, rewritten, and debated. Some call it progress. Others call it window dressing. But the truth sits somewhere in the middle. It made owners say the quiet part out loud. From Art Shell's first headset to the boardrooms of the modern league, every gain had to be fought for twice. Once on the field and once behind closed doors. The faces at the top stayed the same, but the silence was broken forever. Because once you hear the truth, you can't unhear it. And soon, the fight would move beyond sidelines and suits to something deeper. Who gets to speak? Who gets punished for speaking? And what happens when taking a knee shakes the whole country? Act 7. Colin Kaepernick and the Price of Silence. Part 1. When the kneel began. It started quietly. Just a man sitting on a bench during the national anthem. August 2016, preseason. The stadium in San Francisco glowed red and gold. Cameras pointed at the field, not the sidelines. But someone noticed Colin Kaepernick, the 49ers quarterback, not standing. When a reporter asked why, his answer cut through the noise. I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. The next day, every talk show host in America had an opinion. White fans called it disrespect. Veterans called him ungrateful. The team's front office said he was a distraction. Black teammates understood immediately. He was tired of seeing men who looked like him die in the street with no justice. The next game, he did something smaller, but louder. He took a knee. No fist, no shout. Just one man kneeling on green turf while the anthem played. Cameras zoomed in. The picture went everywhere. The message was simple, but it cut deep. If America can't stand for me, I won't stand for America. Soon, other players joined. Eric Reed knelt beside him. Across the league, fists rose before kickoff, but so did the backlash. Part 2. The Backlash Machine. Within weeks, white commentators on television called him anti-American. Fans burned his jersey in parking lots. Team owners, almost all white, called emergency meetings. They said players were hurting the brand. Sponsors pulled ads. Reporters stopped asking about football and only asked about patriotism. Kaepernick kept explaining calmly, "It's not about the military. It's about police brutality and equality." But no one who wanted to stay comfortable was listening. In 2017, the 49ers released him. No team called. Quarterbacks with worse stats got signed immediately. When asked why, one owner said, "We don't want the circus." Another told a reporter off record, "Our fans wouldn't tolerate it." That's how a silent protest turned into a career death. Meanwhile, the president at the time fanned the flames. At a rally, he shouted, "Get that son of a off the field right now." The crowd of mostly white fans roared. Kaepernick lost everything: contracts, endorsements, even friends afraid to speak up. He kept training, posting videos of himself, throwing 60-yard passes to show he was ready. No team even granted him a workout. The NFL didn't just close a door, it nailed it shut. Part 3. The Reckoning and the Echo. For a while, the league tried to erase him. Networks stopped showing the kneeling players. Commentators said, "Focus on the game." But the world outside kept burning. Each new name, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Breonna Taylor, made the silence louder. Then came 2020. George Floyd's murder played on every phone in America. Millions marched, and suddenly, players and even white coaches knelt on the sidelines. The same league that had banned protest now released a video saying, "We were wrong for not listening." Roger Goodell, the white commissioner who once stayed quiet, admitted the truth. But Kaepernick still didn't have a job. They said it was football reasons. Everyone knew better. He became a symbol instead of a player. Nike signed him again with the line, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." White critics promised to boycott. Sales went up anyway. For young black athletes, his stand meant everything. They saw a man give up millions for dignity. They saw the cost of speaking in a place built on silence. And yet, inside team offices, nothing really changed. Owners stayed white. Coaches stayed cautious. Every time a player spoke up, reporters asked, "Will this hurt his career?" From Fritz Pollard, fighting to play, to Doug Williams, fighting to win, to Colin Kaepernick, fighting just to be heard, the story stayed the same. Each generation found a new field, a new version of the same enemy, wearing a suit instead of a jersey. But Kaepernick's knee became more than a protest. It became a mirror, showing the league and the country what it still refused to see. Because in the NFL, silence was always the safest play. He was the first one brave enough to lose the game just to tell the truth. Act 8, The Corporate Apology, 2020 to present. Part 1. The year the league looked in the mirror. It began in silence again, just like before. Spring 2020. The stadiums were empty from the pandemic, but the streets were full. Millions of people were marching after watching a white police officer press his knee into George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The world couldn't look away anymore. Inside the NFL's glass towers, panic spread. Teams released short statements. "We stand for justice." But fans, especially black fans, saw through them. They remembered 2016, when Colin Kaepernick had knelt for the same reason and been erased. Every camera turned toward the commissioner, Roger Goodell, a white man in a dark suit who had said almost nothing back then. Now, 4 years later, the question echoed online. Would he finally say his name? For days, he didn't. Players started making their own video. Patrick Mahomes, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas, each one saying the words the league wouldn't. "Black Lives Matter. We are tired. We will not be silent." When the video hit millions of views overnight, the league couldn't hide. That weekend, Goodell appeared on screen from his home office. His voice was steady but nervous. "We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier." He never mentioned Kaepernick, not once. But everyone knew who he meant. For a moment, some fans cheered. Others called it a performance. Because an apology without change was just another kind of silence. And soon, that silence would be tested. Part 2. Money, Promises, and the Spotlight. After the apology, the NFL announced a 10-year, $250 million fund for social justice initiatives. It sounded huge, but activists asked the obvious question: where was this money when players were kneeling? Behind closed doors, white owners held Zoom meetings. They agreed to donate, film public service videos, and paint "End Racism" in the end zones. It looked good on TV, yet the same owners still wrote campaign checks to politicians who fought police reform. Players noticed. One locker room story spread fast. A young black player asked his general manager why the team logo still honored a slave-owning family name. The GM laughed and said, "Son, that's tradition." Tradition, the same word that had defended every barrier before. When training camp opened, more players started speaking out. The league aired tributes before games. But on social media, racist messages flooded their inboxes. White fans wrote, "Stick to football." Sponsors stayed quiet. Then came a shocking lawsuit. Brian Flores, a black head coach fired by Miami after 2 winning seasons, sued the league for discrimination in 2022. He revealed text messages from white coaches who had accidentally congratulated him for a job interview before he even had it, because the team had already hired a white coach. The Rooney Rule, meant to guarantee fairness, had become a photo op. The league promised another investigation, another rewrite of the rule. But the pattern was clear: apology, donation, distraction, repeat. Players saw the difference between brand and belief. They wore shirts that read, "We still here," because every press release felt like paint over cracks that never stopped. Spreading. Part 3. The future they keep promising. By 2023, the slogans were fading, but the questions weren't. How many black head coaches? Still just a few. How many black owners? None. How many black general managers with real power? A handful. The league kept posting videos of unity, white coaches locking arms with black players before kickoff. But behind the scenes, players whispered that little had changed. Some teams held diversity training. Others quietly warned athletes not to get political. When Kaepernick offered to return for tryouts, teams politely declined again. They said it wasn't about race, just that one word, fit, had carried decades of discrimination inside it. Still, a new generation of players refused to be quiet. Patrick Mahomes used his platform to fund voting drives. Jaylen Brown and Malcolm Jenkins launched education programs. They turned protest into progress their own way, without waiting for permission. Meanwhile, the league's glossy commercials kept playing over slow music. Football is family. But to many black families, football had always felt like a house where they could play in the yard, never own the key. In 2024, another incident proved how thin the line still was. A white commentator mocked a black quarterback's speaking style on live TV. The network apologized, suspended him for a week, and moved on. The player kept getting questions about leadership. The NFL had mastered the public apology. But apology is not equality, and fans began to notice. Across America, black kids still loved the game. They wore jerseys of Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts, hoping to be next. Their parents reminded them of what came before: Pollard, Harris, Williams, Kaepernick. They told them, play smart, speak truth, be ready for the price. Because the league might say "End Racism" in bold white letters, but history had taught every black player what those words were really worth when the cameras turned off. From the first hidden ban to the loudest corporate apology, the pattern never changed. White hands built the system. Black courage kept forcing it to look at itself. The NFL learned how to say the right things, but words without justice are only noise. And every time the league tries to wrap its image in slogans, the echoes of the past break through the sound. Because a real apology isn't spoken in a press conference. It's spoken on the field, when the playing field is finally level. Act 9. The New Generation, 2000s and 20s and Beyond. Part 1. A new era that still feels old. The cameras flash, the crowd roars, it looks like progress. But behind the cheers, the story still feels familiar. By the 2020s, the NFL was filled with young, brilliant black quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Deshaun Watson, C.J. Stroud. Each of them played the position that once belonged only to white men. And each carried the same question on their shoulders. Will they let us lead, or will they just let us entertain? When Mahomes won his first Super Bowl, white reporters called him unbelievable. When a white quarterback made the same throw, they called it textbook. The word, choice, always told the truth. One still seen as a surprise, the other as a standard. Mahomes smiled through it. He knew what Doug Williams had faced, what Shaq Harris had endured. His game spoke louder than any press conference. But even as he lifted another Lombardi trophy, there were still white voices online calling him lucky, as if brilliance needed permission. Lamar Jackson faced a different version. Before the draft, scouts called him too quick, not accurate enough. They suggested he switch to wide receiver, the same tired code that had stalked black quarterbacks for decades. He refused. "I'm a quarterback," he said, calm but certain. When he won the league's MVP a year later, the same people who doubted him suddenly used words like special talent, not intelligent, not student of the game, just talent, as if his mind wasn't part of the victory. The old pattern had just learned how to sound polite, and for every star who made it, there were still countless black assistants and college players who never got the chance. The field looked different, but the people who controlled the whistles still looked the same. It was a new generation on the field, but an old one holding the power. Part 2. The Silent Lines of Power. In front of the cameras, the league preached equality. Behind closed doors, black coaches still waited for their calls that never came. The Rooney Rule was older now, rewritten, reworded, but the results didn't change much. In 2022, Brian Flores, the same man who helped the Dolphins win their first back-to-back winning seasons in 2 decades, was fired. No scandal, no losing record. He sued the league for racial discrimination. The proof was in text messages. A white coach accidentally congratulating him for a job interview that hadn't happened yet, because the team had already hired someone white. When he spoke up, media outlets called him angry. White owners called him ungrateful. He just called it what it was: sham opportunities. Other black assistants reached out quietly, afraid to go public. They all had stories that sounded the same, interviews they were never meant to win, rooms where they felt like props for a photo, front offices that talked about diversity, but not power. Even the broadcast booths told the same story. White analysts with average careers got prime spots on television. Black legends with Hall of Fame resumes were told, "We're going in another direction." Yet, something was shifting. Players were starting to notice. When Mahomes and Hurts faced each other in Super Bowl 57, 2 black quarterbacks on the biggest stage in America, it wasn't just a game, it was history in helmets. But before kickoff, one commentator made a quiet remark on live TV. "This is a special moment for African Americans." He didn't say for football, he didn't say for America. Even in celebration, the divide remained. Black success was treated as an exception, not a norm, and still, they played. They played knowing what it meant for every kid watching, and every barrier that still stood just out of view. Because the next fight wouldn't be about touchdowns, it would be about ownership. Part 3. The fight for the stage itself. By 2024, the NFL was a billion-dollar empire built mostly on black talent. The bodies on the field were black. The money in the boardrooms was white. No black majority owners, no black CEOs, no black commissioner. That gap told the real story. It wasn't just about who played. It was about who profited. When rapper Jay-Z signed a partnership with the NFL in 2019 to bring social change through entertainment, the move divided the black community. Some called it progress. Others called it a distraction. Kaepernick still didn't have a job, yet the league was ready to book halftime shows about unity. In 2023, the NFL's Inspire Change campaign aired during the playoffs. A white narrator's voice spoke over slow music. "Together, we are one team." But for many, the ad felt hollow. Black players were still being fined for minor dress code violations, while white players got warnings. Fans still hurled racial slurs from stands with little punishment, and executives still used the same word that had survived every decade. That word explained why the league stayed the same even when it pretended to change. A black man could be strong, fast, even heroic, but when it came to leadership, ownership, and control, fit always seemed to mean white. Despite all that, the new generation refused to stop pushing. Patrick Mahomes opened a foundation for voting rights. Jalen Hurts hired an all-women, all-black management team. Lamar Jackson negotiated his own contract without an agent, forcing teams to face him as an equal, not a project. Each step was another inch of freedom in a game that had always been fenced in. And every Sunday, when the cameras panned across the field, little black boys and girls saw something their grandparents had never seen. Not just players, but leaders. Not just talent, but thinkers. Not just survivors, but owners of their own story. 100 years after Fritz Pollard fought to stay on the field, black excellence had taken over the scoreboard. But the scoreboard had never told the whole story. The faces had changed. The words had softened. But the game underneath was still tilted the same way. Every touchdown, every contract, every protest was part of one long drive down the same field. A field built on resistance, covered in history, and still chasing equality. Because this generation didn't inherit football. It inherited a fight. And now, they were playing to win more than games. Act 10, The Mirror, Legacy and the Future of Black NFL History. Part 1, The Reflection. It starts with a highlight. Real. Touchdowns, trophies, smiling faces. But when the music fades, the reflection behind it tells a harder truth. A century has passed since Fritz Pollard first stepped onto a muddy field surrounded by hate. Now the stadiums are bigger, the uniforms shinier, the crowds louder, yet the same quiet question still lingers in the air. Has anything really changed? When a black player fumbles, he becomes a headline. When a white coach fails, he gets a second chance. When a black man speaks out, he's called divisive. When a white one does, he's called brave. The game keeps evolving, but the balance doesn't. Inside the NFL headquarters, walls of glass reflect the faces of executives who look nearly identical. White, male, powerful. They smile for photos beside black players, the same ones whose names sell the tickets, jerseys, and TV ads that keep those offices standing. The league celebrates diversity months and heritage weeks. It posts hashtags and commercials about unity. But when you look closer, it feels less like change and more like performance. Black players built the league's foundation with sweat, skill, and sacrifice. But the ownership, the media rights, and the generational wealth, those stayed in white hands. Every era produced heroes who fought the same fight in different uniforms. The 1920s had Fritz Pollard. The 1960s had Shaq Harris. The 1980s had Doug Williams. The 2010s had Colin Kaepernick. And now, in the 2020s, a new generation carries that same torch, knowing the light can burn as easily as it shines. Because the truth of the league lives not in what it says, but in what it still refuses to do. Part 2, The Weight of the Past. Every young black player who steps onto the field inherits more than a jersey. He inherits history. Before he ever throws a pass or breaks a tackle, there's an expectation, a story written long before he was born. When he wins, he's called a symbol. When he loses, he's called a warning. Black quarterbacks still walk into press conferences asked if they can read defenses. Black coaches still have to prove they can lead men. The code never changes, just the vocabulary, and the reminders are constant. During one broadcast, a white commentator described a black player's strength as animalistic. Another praised a white quarterback's intelligence and discipline. Same game, same skill, different language. That's how racism hides in plain sight, behind compliments that don't feel equal. Meanwhile, black athletes carry invisible jobs that white players never have to. Role model, spokesperson, activist, teacher. Every action is magnified, every silence judged. When Patrick Mahomes donates to schools, people call it charity. When he talks about racism, they call it politics. When Lamar Jackson dances after a touchdown, it's showboating. When a white quarterback pumps his fist, it's passion. It's a small difference in words, but it carries the weight of centuries. Off the field, the gap widens even more. Most team owners come from family money, generational wealth built during eras when black families were redlined, underpaid, or outright banned from ownership. The system that locked Fritz Pollard out never truly disappeared. It just changed its wardrobe. Players see it. Fans see it. The world sees it. And yet, every February, the NFL posts a new commercial celebrating Black History Month. They honor the same heroes they once ignored. The applause feels warm, but also hollow, because honoring the past is easy. Sharing the future is the real challenge. Part 3, The Road Ahead. There are moments now that still spark hope. Black quarterbacks lead teams, black coaches win championships, and black voices carry further than ever before. But the fight isn't over. It's just moved to a different field. When a black coach like Mike Tomlin wins year after year, white analysts call him steady. When he speaks about racism, they call him emotional. He's never just allowed to be human, only a label. When young players sign record-breaking deals, People online ask if they deserve it, as if success always needs justification when it's attached to black excellence. In 2025 and beyond, the league faces its biggest question yet. Who gets to tell the story? The highlight reels are still edited by white producers. The documentaries are still narrated by white voices. The money still flows to the same boardrooms that never once had to earn forgiveness. But the players, this new generation, know the history too well to stay quiet. They own their brands, their platforms, and their voices. They can speak directly to fans without the league filtering the message. Some start foundations. Others invest in their own media companies. A few even dream about ownership, knowing how many white doors they'll have to knock through to get there. One day, a black child might grow up not just to play for a team, but to own one. When that happens, it will be more than a victory for football. It will be the final chapter in a story that began 100 years ago, with Fritz Pollard running through mud while the crowd called him names. Until then, every Sunday is still a reminder of how far the game has come and how far it still has to go. Because every time a black quarterback stands in that pocket, every time a black coach holds that headset, every time a player takes a knee, they're not just playing for a score. They're playing for history. They are the mirror the league can't escape. They are the reflection of a truth too strong to hide. That the game was never just about football. It was always about who gets to be seen as equal. From the muddy fields of 1920 to the billion-dollar stadiums of today, black athletes turned the NFL from a pastime into a global empire. And in return, they've spent a century demanding the simplest thing: respect. The white owners, the white media, the white silence. It all remains, polished and smiling. But the story has changed hands now. It belongs to the players who refuse to forget, to the fans who know what the commercials won't say, and to the children watching, who will grow up knowing that the league's history is also their own. Because every generation has had to fight for the right to belong, but one day, that fight will end. And when it does, the reflection in the mirror won't show color first. It'll show people, humans who earned their place by talent, not tolerance. That's what black NFL history was always about. Not protest, not controversy, not even football. It was about the truth and the courage to finally say it out loud. Act 11. The Next Generation's Legacy, 2030 and Beyond. Part 1. The kids who grew up watching it begins on playgrounds and dusty practice fields. Little boys and girls wearing jerseys with names like Mahomes, Jackson, and Hurts. They don't know the whole story yet. They just know the players on their screens look like them. But behind those small smiles lives a long shadow. Because every highlight they cheer for today is built on a century of fight. The field still isn't equal. It's just better disguised. By the 2030s, football will look faster, cleaner, even safer. New helmets, new rules, new technology. But the human story will still matter most. Black players will fill nearly every position, but the people running the league will still be white. Out of 32 NFL teams, almost all the owners will still come from the same backgrounds. Rich white families passing power down like property. They'll smile at draft day, pose with black players, and keep the real decisions locked behind closed doors. The players of this new generation will grow up seeing the patterns earlier. They'll notice which coaches get second chances and which never get first ones. They'll see how every statement about unity comes right before another scandal about discrimination. Some will learn to play the game on the field and off it. Others will decide they don't need the league to tell their story anymore, because the new generation has something the old ones never did: their own voice. Social media will be their megaphone. They'll speak directly to millions without permission, without editing, without fear, until someone tries to take that away too. And that's where the next battle begins. Part 2. The digital field. In the 2030s, the game won't only be played on grass, it will be played on screens. Clips, quotes, and live streams will travel faster than the ball itself. A young black quarterback will post a message about racism in his city. Within hours, white fans will flood his page with comments. Just play. Sponsors will call the team asking if he can tone it down. The team will call it media training. The cycle will feel familiar. Different decade. Same silence. Another player will record himself reading the names of unarmed black people killed by police. The video will go viral, and so will the backlash. A white commentator will say, "He's dividing the fan base." That phrase, dividing the fan base, will replace ungrateful as the new code word. Meanwhile, the league will keep running ads showing white and black players hugging before games. The camera will pan to an end zone that says "End Racism." But outside the stadium, protests will remind everyone that painted words don't fix broken systems. Inside locker rooms, younger players will start questioning why they should risk their bodies for owners who treat them like parts. A new movement will grow, not against football, but against how it uses them. Black players will form alliances, hire lawyers, and demand real ownership stakes in the game they built. For the first time, the league will face something it can't ignore, an entire generation that isn't scared to walk away. And one player will test that line like no one before him. Part 3. The Breaking Point. The year is 2035. The season starts like any other. Anthem, fireworks, the crowd roaring. Then a 25-year-old black quarterback kneels, not for protest, but for prayer. A white fan throws a cup from the stands and yells, "Stand up." Cameras catch it. The image spreads around the world. Reporters twist it into another political fight. The player explains calmly, "I knelt to thank God for letting me play." But the moment is already gone. Within days, talk shows argue over patriotism again. It's not really about football. It never was. It's about control. The league releases another statement. "We value respect during the anthem." That word, respect, is the new cage. By then, several retired black stars have become billionaires from media companies and tech ventures. They launch an independent player-run league, promising equal pay, mental health care, and full transparency. The NFL laughs at first. Then, ratings start to slip. Fans, especially younger, more diverse fans, begin to switch over. They see authenticity, honesty, something the corporate league lost decades ago. White owners meet in private again, just like in 1933. Only this time, they're the ones afraid that the game they controlled for a century might finally belong to the people who built it. When reporters ask if they'll ever sell, one owner says, "The league will never change hands." He doesn't realize it already has. Just not on paper yet. Because the future of football doesn't live in those boardrooms anymore. It lives in every kid who watched Kaepernick kneel, Doug Williams win, or Mahomes lead with pride. It lives in the players who learned that silence can be broken and kept it that way. The story of black history in the NFL began with a man who wasn't allowed to stand on the same sideline as his white teammates. Now it ends, for now, with a generation that refuses to be silent, invisible, or owned. The bad people changed faces. Owners, executives, broadcasters. But the pattern never really changed. Every time black excellence rose, white power tried to control it. Every time the door opened, someone in a suit tried to close it again. But this time, there's no going back. Because the next era of football isn't just about winning games. It's about owning them. Not just playing for change, but being the change. And when the next child laces up their cleats, they won't just see athletes, they'll see ancestors of courage. They'll know that the fight for equality isn't finished, but they'll also know it's theirs now, because every yard gained was never just for a touchdown. It was for a voice, a future, and a truth too powerful to silence again. Act 12, the final reflection, a century in black and white. Part 1, the echo of the past. The lights fade, the crowd noise softens, and for a moment, the game stops. 100 years of history echo in the silence. Every yard, every tackle, every protest has led to this point. Somewhere, a young black boy stands in front of a TV screen, holding a football that's too big for his hands. He watches his heroes and smiles, but he doesn't know he's holding a story much heavier than that ball. He's holding the weight of the men who weren't allowed to play, the coaches who weren't allowed to lead, and the players who were punished for speaking the truth. The league looks polished now. Glittering stadiums, billion-dollar brands, slogans painted across end zones. It looks like progress, but if you listen close, you can still hear the voices underneath the cheers. The ones who were told no, again and again. The ones who kept showing up anyway. The white faces in the boardrooms still make the rules. The black faces on the field still make the league matter. It's the same story told in different uniforms. And yet, every generation pushed the line a little farther. Pollard took the first step. Harris took the hits. Williams broke the scoreboard. Kaepernick broke the silence. And this new generation refuses to bow to anyone. But as the game grew, so did the mirror. Every touchdown, every protest, every headline reflected back the same question. Who really owns the soul of football? Part 2. The Cost of Greatness. For every victory the league celebrates, there's a price paid in quiet rooms. A black player denied a job, a coach passed over, a voice silenced before it could rise. In the film rooms, coaches still say things like, "We want high IQ players." They never say what they mean, but everyone knows. In contract meetings, black athletes still have to prove twice what others get by default. A single mistake can erase a season of excellence. For white players, mistakes are lessons. For black ones, they're labels. That's how discrimination survives. It doesn't always shout anymore. It whispers. A black quarterback throws an interception, and the broadcast questions his decision-making. A white one throws the same pick, and they say he took a chance. The same play, different story. Outside the field, the power still moves quietly too. White owners meet to discuss new rules, new profits, new ways to keep control. They smile for cameras and call the league a family. But family isn't ownership, it's equality, and the NFL still hasn't learned the difference. Yet the game refuses to be silenced. Every touchdown by a black player is a reminder of survival. Every coach who walks the sideline with confidence carries 100 years of names behind him, and in every locker room, there's a player who knows he's not just fighting for a ring, he's fighting to be remembered right. Because greatness means nothing if the system that measures it was never built for you in the first place. Part 3. The century that changed everything now. Imagine that same boy from the beginning, a little older, walking through the halls of a museum dedicated to the game. He stops in front of a black and white photo of Fritz Pollard, covered in mud, surrounded by teammates who never wanted him there. Next to it is a video screen showing Patrick Mahomes holding up a Super Bowl trophy. Two images, 100 years apart, connected by the same thread. Black excellence in a world that never planned for it. That's the mirror. When the NFL looks into it, it sees both pride and guilt, progress and prejudice. It sees everything it built and everything it broke. Some white fans will say, it's just football. But for black players, it was never just a game. It was proof they belonged in a world that tried to shut them out. It was a platform and a battlefield at the same time. And now, after a century, the fight is no longer about entry. It's about ownership. Who tells the stories? Who signs the checks? Who shapes the future? The league may keep its billion-dollar empire, but the truth belongs to the players who made it matter. Their stories of courage, defiance, faith are the heartbeat beneath the scoreboard. Somewhere, a black coach is about to call his first play as a head coach. Somewhere, a young woman is breaking into front office leadership. Somewhere, a kid is dreaming bigger than the field. They are the new chapter, and this time, the old guard can't stop it. Because history doesn't end, it evolves. And the next generation isn't waiting for permission. The NFL's history of black excellence isn't just a sports story. It's a story of America itself. White power built the walls. Black resilience kept climbing them. 100 years later, the game stands taller, louder, richer. But every time a player takes the field, that same question hums in the background. Will this be the moment it finally changes? Maybe it already has. Because the very existence of these stories, the telling, the remembering, the refusing to forget, is victory in itself. From Pollard's mud-stained uniform to Mahomes' golden confetti, from silence to shouting, from segregation to superstardom, the thread never broke. It only stretched, across generations, across struggle, across time. And as the next century begins, the reflection in the mirror finally starts to look clear. A story of pain, power, and progress. A story built by the hands, hearts, and hope of black men and women who refuse to disappear. Because this isn't just black football history. It's American history, told in every yard, every fight, and every voice that refused to stay quiet.